Ah! There was a scream of pain. Help! My tummy! Chief Nnes screamed for help. Servants rushed to him to help, but before they realized what the problem was, Chief Nnes had began throwing up, and in an eye's blink, he given up the ghost. The kingdom of Aku rested at the foot of the thick mountains. It was a place where time moved leisurely and where there was peace and harmony. The people of Aku were friendly and welcoming. People from other villages came to farm and trade in the village. Everything went on well for years and even more years until a chief in Aku fell victim to a treacherous plan. Just like wildfire, the news of the chief's death had spread and had gotten to the palace. The king found this worrying and unusual, so he decided to consult the priest. After making the necessary sacrifices, it was revealed that Chief Nnes was poisoned. It was also revealed that a stranger amongst them had poisoned him. Particularly, one of the servants from the neighboring village was the culprit. The chief priest said, "My king, let all the servants in Chief Nnes' household be brought here." He continued his divination with his colonuts and cowries. Immediately, the king sent for them. As they all knelt before the chief priest, he said, "The gods revealed to me that a stranger had done this evil act. All the servants were indigenes of Aku except for a young skinny boy who was employed a few weeks back. He was from Kabo, the neighboring village." The chief priest further explained that poison gin was meant to be a gift for the king, but Chief Nnes was curious about a mere servant giving the king such gift. So, he decided to sample one to ensure that there was nothing in it. And he met his death but saved the king. The mouths of the audience in the palace widened in disbelief and pity. The king said painfully, "Nnes saved my life. Ha! Whoever this is, he would pay dearly." The young skinny boy began to shake. The priest asked, "Why have you come here?" "My king sent me. I did not do it on my own volition. He wants to claim the land. My king sent me." The boy said, shakily. Sweat had broken out on his forehead. The king stood up with rage. He said, "Well, you will be used as a scapegoat. We welcomed you here, and this is how our welcoming hands will be the death of us. How dare you? I am sorry." He fell flat on his face, but the pleadings fell on the deaf ears of the king. The king was angry and ordered for the young servant to be beheaded on top of the hill, so that when the people from the other village see his body, they would not dare to repeat such sacrilege. The executioners took the young boy to the top of the hill. His hands and legs were tied to the back while his head was chopped off at once. The servant's body was left for birds to feed on it. Few days later, one of the hunters from Kabo saw the dead body and the head of the young boy. Flies and birds had already had their share from the body. When he saw the neckpiece just beside the body, he screamed. The beheaded servant was his nephew. He screamed for all the villagers to hear. He wrapped the dead body and wailed as he entered the village. The hunter dropped the body right in front of the palace and cried, "O king! You sent the young boy to Aku. Look at what has become of him, O king!" The king of Kabo came out to see why the wailings had increased. His anger built up when he saw the body of the young boy. "Ha! They have asked for war. Tell the young men to prepare for battle against the king of Aku. He has toyed with the lion's tail." The king stormed in angrily as he ordered for his men to be prepared for battle. He sent word to the king of Aku to prepare for war. In the kingdom of Aku, a messenger delivered the news to a guard and ran off. The guard went to the king. "Greetings, my king." The king sat lazily. "What is the matter?" The guard explained. "The matter is a terrible one. A messenger from Kabo dropped a message. A message of war. From the king of Kabo." The king laughed. "Then war it is. Tell the men to prepare for war. Call my son immediately." The king's only son was Prince Odi. He was the only child as well. He was a handsome, able-bodied man who enjoyed admiration from the people, especially young maidens, but he was betrothed to a beautiful young lady. Her name was Oma. Oma was trained from a very young age to become the wife of the prince and also the future queen. She was the king's favorite. The prince was in a deep conversation with Oma. She wanted a change of servants. She was about to state her reasons when the guard approached the prince. "My prince, the king has sent for you," he said. "I will be with him shortly." We are in the middle of something. The prince noted. The guard insisted. It is very urgent, my prince. The prince excused himself. I'll be back and we would discuss about it. You can change them if you wish, he told Oma. All right, she nodded. The prince rushed into the palace after a short while. You sent for me, father, the prince said. Yes, I did. The king replied. I'm here. He bowed. My son, I want you to prepare 40 warriors. The king instructed. What for, father? He was curious. The king of Cabo has sent a message declaring war. The king said, because of the dead son of theirs, I suppose. Well, they should not have sent the boy to poison me or Chief Ani. Imagine, that small village. A few warriors would conquer their men and even wipe off the village. Yes, father. We will prepare for war. The prince bowed and left the palace in preparation for war. There was a market day just before the day of war. The prince decided to visit the market for inspection. As he walked through the market, a woman in tattered clothes came to him. My prince, do not go to war. Settle it amicably. Do not let the king die. The woman whispered. He looked at her from head to toe. Her hair was in a permanent form of mess. Her clothes had several holes and tears. Her feet were bare and she looked impoverished. He wondered how she knew about the war. Who says the king will die? The decision to go to war is made, he said and walked away, shaking his head. The woman followed him and the people shouted at her. Mad woman! Leave the prince alone. The guards who were paces away from the prince chased her away. When the prince got back to the palace, Oma approached him. Her face was drowned in worry. My prince, you are back, she said, walking to him. Yes, I am. He nodded. I heard the news. The people are talking about the war between our village and Cabo. She placed her hands on his arm. Yes, you should not bother about these things. He smiled at her. I am only looking out for you, Odie. She tugged at his arm. He brushed her cheeks and said, I appreciate it, Oma. I would leave to prepare the men. The prince left for the training ground. On the day of the war, there was a fierce battle between the two villages. Blood was spilled, and bodies were cut into and wounded. Screams of pain and anger flew in the air. After several hours of war, the warriors of Aku were defeated. Their bodies laid helplessly all over the battlefield. The neighboring village lost some warriors, but Aku lost as only the prince and 2 warriors came back alive, but they were covered in wounds. The warriors of Cabo were not so skilled, but were heavily protected with charms. This made the warriors of Aku lose the battle. It took the prince and the 2 warriors 2 days to get to the village as their limbs were sore and their bodies were injured badly. Finally, as the injured warriors approached the palace, the guards ran to help them. They stood before the king and explained how the battle was. He roared and cursed in the air. Just the 3 of you survived. This is ridiculous. How can that small village defeat the warriors of Aku? He questioned. I cannot explain, father. It was not an easy feat. They overpowered us. I suspect the use of charm, father. The prince explained. Charm? They would see who is more powerful. Get treatment and prepare another 40 warriors for war. The king ordered. We would need more than 40 men. One of the warriors said. Yes, we would need more men, father. The prince added. Do not question me. Do as I say. The king thundered. He was already furious at their loss. He sent servants to their quarters to treat the men's wounds and feed them. Oma rushed to the prince's quarters to cater for him. She made sure the servants tended to his wounds and checked up on him regularly until he was well. Days later, after the preparation, the warriors had their bow and arrows, some had swords and knives. As they went to the palace for blessings, they saw the king dressed up in animal skin. The chief priest had done some incantations over them. The warriors were shocked to see the king dressed for war. They were taken aback as he tucked in his knives and slouched the arrow quiver over his back. Father, why are you dressed up? The prince asked. I will go with you to the battlefield. If 40 men won't be enough like you said, 41 men should be. The king laughed and patted his back. The prince remembered what the mad woman said at the market and tried to talk him out of going to war, but he paid no listening ears. They intended on attacking the village of Cabo unannounced, not knowing the warriors were ever ready. Another battle began, and again, the warriors of Aku lost. Even the warriors of Cabo were battered. Some retreated as they could no longer stand the bloodshed. Their charms seemingly faded, but havoc had been done. The king of Aku made it an assignment to kill the king of Cabo. He did it successfully by sending an arrow to his heart, but just as he killed the king of Cabo, a warrior struck him down with a sword. The king was dead, so were all the warriors of Aku. The prince was badly injured. He fell to the ground amidst the bodies of warriors. He was struggling hard to hold on to life, and his breath was gradually going. The hut of the mad woman was few miles from the battlefield, just between both villages. None of the villages wanted her, so she lived there. As the war went on, she shook her head and covered her ears. She mumbled inaudible words until the war had stopped. By sunset, when everything had quieted, she wandered about, looking for food to eat. She walked to the battlefield. Dead bodies were scattered across the land. She grew happy as she saw a small warrior's bag containing wraps of bean cake, but blood had soaked the better part of it. She tried to gather the food she could, and when she was about to leave, she heard a faint voice calling for help. She checked each person on the ground, using her hands to check for a sign of life, but there was none. When she got to the prince, she felt his faint breath. Immediately, she threw the bean cakes and tore some clothes to tie up his bleeding wounds. Afterwards, she tried to lift him up from the floor, but she could not. He was too big and strong for her to keep up. It will be of no use if he can't walk. After several trials, she dropped his arms and said, "Hold on, I will be back." She ran all the way to her hut, which was quite far. She fished out long sacks, ropes, and a pile of clothes. When she got back to the field, she placed the sacks and pulled the rope around it. She rolled him over to the sack and placed his head atop the pile of clothes for much comfort. When it was all set, she dragged him gently through the grass, taking him to her hut. By the time she got to the hut, it was already dark and he had lost his consciousness. She loosened the ropes and laid him on the mat, washed his wounds, applied some herbs and tied the wounds properly. She watched him sleep and always checked for his temperature. When he woke up the next morning, his eyes were half opened. He was too tired to open his eyes. She made him some hot watery soup and fed him. She let him rest and treated the wounds. This went on, and after 3 days, the prince was fully awake and had healed up almost completely. He was shocked to see the woman. It was the mad woman he saw at the market that day. She was the mad woman who came to the market to gather fruits and foods that were almost spoilt, and the sellers had to throw it to her. She was the same mad woman who had warned him about the war, and now, here he is, in her hut being taken care of. He sat up and looked around. It was a small hut with no proper structure. It was manageable, but he was used to his quarters. "Careful. The pains may be sharp if you move too fast," she said. Her voice was low, and at the same time, he could hear her well. "You brought me to your hut?" he asked. "Should I have left you on the field?" She shot back at him. The prince sighed. "Thank you very much." He owed his life to her. The prince never expected her to be kind and composed because of how he had seen her previously, especially in the market. He watched how she turned the water for his bath. The expression on the prince's face showed how strange he saw her mode of living. She took a glance at him and chuckled. "I know you are the prince, but this is what I can do at least." The prince nodded reluctantly. "And I appreciate that," she said. "That is not what I see on your face." "Forgive me, then. What is your name?" he asked her. She did not want any questions. "Why do you want to know my name? You needed help and it ends there." He insisted. "But I need to know who saved my life and took me in." The woman stopped and shook her head. "My name is Laro," he said curtly. "Okay. I am Odie." She gave him a knowing look. "I know." The prince wondered why he was the only one being saved. He asked, "Do you know where the other men are?" She laughed and replied, "Other men? They are all dead. You almost joined them." The prince's eyes widened as he asked, "And the king?" Laro ignored the question. I'm sure some men from the village have gone to take their bodies and the king's. Prince Odie's body trembled. The king? My father? Laro nodded. I must leave immediately. I must go to the village, the prince said at once. Laro reminded him. You have not properly recovered. He pressed. I do not care about my recovery. I only want to see my father. Prince Odie struggled to stand up. Laro watched him as he walked out of the hut, limping. Laro called after him. You cannot go alone. He insisted. I can and I will. Prince Odie limped until his ankles began to hurt. He was not sure he would make it to the village before nightfall. Pain and worry filled his heart. He sat down on a rock, resting for a while. Just as he was about to stand up again, Laro showed up. You must be thirsty. Take. She stretched a bottle skin of water to him. He drank hungrily and thanked her. She assisted him to the village, with his hands on her shoulders. Prince Odie felt lucky to meet this woman even though she was mentally ill. All these while, the villagers had thought the prince was dead and lost because his body could not be folded warriors they had gone to retrieve. They sent out a search party but no one could find him. Oma had resolved to weeping and refusing to eat as the one whom she was betrothed to was dead. She cried in the open and cried more in secret. She was devastated by the absence of the prince. At nightfall, the prince and the madwoman got to the palace. Immediately, the guards rushed to him and took him in. They were happy that the prince had survived. As they saw Laro, the madwoman, they chased her away. Don't chase her away. Don't treat her like that, Prince Odie ordered. But she is mentally ill. Look at her tattered clothes and her hair. My prince, we cannot let her in. One of the guards spoke. But she took care of me. She saved my life, the prince said. The guards were shocked and did not believe the words that the prince said. You are probably under a spell, my prince. Let us take you to your quarters and you will be taken care of properly. The other guards said, and they took the prince in. Despite the prince's orders, Laro was chased out of the palace. One of the guards ran after her with a stick. In fear, Laro ran and ran. She ran all the way to the empty and dark market. She could not make it to her hut. So, she spent the night under one of the big abattoir tables. It was still that night. The news had spread amongst the servants and guards that the prince had returned and he was safe and sound. Some believed while others doubted. Oma wondered what the whispers were all about and asked, What is happening? It is quite late and everyone seems to be gossiping. A servant replied, The prince has returned. A wave of surprise and relief engulfed Oma. She doubted and at the same time she held on to hope. Are you sure about this? She asked. The guards assisted him to his quarters. The servant said. Oma rushed to the prince's quarters. She was relieved to see him. Nevertheless, she wondered how he survived. The prince was taken care of as he was given some herbal drinks and proper food. He was bathed, massaged in oil and left to rest. Where is my father? He kept asking and nobody seemed to give him a good answer. He asked Oma, Where is father? Oma shifted her gaze from him, trying to hold back the news. She gave no answer. You should rest. Tomorrow is another day. She bade him good night. He tried to ask the servants who came in and out attending to his needs, but his questions were futile as he asked without getting answers until he fell asleep. The next morning, the prince woke up feeling much better. Guards, bring me the woman who followed me here last night, he commanded. The guards stared at each other. They knew one of them had chased her out. Why are you still standing? Go and fetch her. He stormed back to his quarters. The guard who chased her went in search for her. He saw her in the market. She tried to run, but he said, Please wait. The prince requests your presence. She reluctantly agreed, and the guard brought her to the palace. The prince ordered for the servants to take good care of her. When she had been washed and taken care of, he nodded in satisfaction and said, She would stay in the palace from now on. Show her to a room. He told the servants. They prepared a room for her and ushered her in. After the prince had seen to Laro's care, he walked to the main palace and saw the throne empty. The chiefs were not in their seats too. He called a servant and demanded an answer. "Come here." He beckoned on the servant with dishes in her hands. The servant rushed towards him. "Yes, my prince." He asked, "Where's the king? Where's my father?" The servant stammered, He. The king is in his quarters. Hands akimbo." He shook his head and asked, "Why was it hard for everyone to say just that?" "I want to believe he is well." She shifted from one foot to another and finally replied, "The king is not well, my prince, because it is his corpse." "Ha!" he exclaimed and looked at the faces of the guards and those servants moving about. Their faces were gloomy. The prince felt a dagger swing through his heart. His father, the king, was dead. The servant lowered her head and said, "All who went to the battlefield never came back alive. Their bodies were brought 2 days ago. Some were buried immediately. We searched for you, but there was no sign of you anywhere. Even with the loss, we are glad you are back home alive, my prince." "Ha!" he exclaimed again, rushing to his father's quarters. Laro came out as she heard him exclaim. She went after him. He wanted to believe his father was not dead. If he had survived, why didn't his father survive too? Indeed, his father laid on the bed, stiffened. The injuries had been cleaned, but he laid, lifeless. The prince wailed, tugging on to his father's clothes, recalling the times they had spent and when he tried to dissuade him from going to war. The prince's heart was filled with immense sorrow. Laro, seeing him in pain, also cried as she remembered how she had come home to meet her parents' corpse. She sat beside him. "It is okay to weep, but do not weep for too long." "I will weep forever, Laro. This is my father. I should weep forever too. I lost my parents, my family in one day." The prince's eyes lightened with questions. Before he could ask anything, Laro had began to narrate her ordeal. "My parents were the king and queen of Cabo. Everything was well, and I lived a normal life until my uncle killed them because he wanted to rule. He wanted the throne. He used charms to kill them. I found them lying helplessly in their rooms when I arrived from the stream that day. I had to run away in order not to get killed too. My uncle had threatened to kill me too. He said it openly, and it was as though the villagers were under a spell. They worshipped him and found no evil in what he had done. The loss of my family made me cry, and I slowly lost all my senses. Now, the king of Aku is dead because of the same man. My supposed uncle. Wherever he goes, he causes havoc." She cried as she narrated her story. The prince was dumbfounded that the madwoman was actually the princess of Cabo. He felt touched by her story. All they did was cry in each other's arms. Oma walked into the king's room to find Prince Odi in Laro's embrace, both crying. She shook her head and coughed out loud, wanting her presence to be known. "I see you have seen father's corpse and you have a comforter," Oma said. The prince looked at her. "Oma, this is Laro. She saved me at the battlefield," he said. "Oh," she faked a smile. "Good to know you, Laro." Laro only stared at Oma and nodded. Prince Odi left with Laro. Oma followed behind. For several days, the prince mourned his father's death even after the funeral rites. Laro was there for him throughout. Oma tried to comfort him, but he seemed to feel better around Laro. Laro and Prince Odi became fond of each other. Felt like the only one who could be with him was Laro. Oma became annoyed. The little attention she managed to get from the prince all these years had suddenly been seized by some mentally ill woman. The prince and Laro ate together, watched the sunsets together, and soon, the prince began to fall in love with her, leaving Oma angry and jealous. Oma confronted the prince about Laro. "I want to remind you that we are betrothed, but Laro is whom you spend time with." She entered into his room. The prince was surprised by the outburst. He had just arrived from the sightseeing with Laro. "Betrothal doesn't mean marriage. We are not married yet," he stated. "So that is your reason for toying with my emotion? All I have been made to do is to learn how to be a prince's wife and a future queen, but it seems another woman has your heart," she complained. "I am afraid it is so. I did not wish for you to live your life for me. I tried to live with the idea of being married to you very soon, but I have found the one I truly love." He walked to the door. "Odi," So you chose to cast me aside. She tried to stand in his way. He held her hands. I am sorry, Oma. He left for the palace, feeling quite bad about Oma. But his mind was made. He already loved Lero. At a time, the prince became extremely busy and was absent. He had to perform some ritual as the king's son, and no one was to be aware of this ritual. So, he had left the palace for the chief priest's house and stayed there. Days became weeks and his absence was greatly felt. Lero felt abandoned. Oma was already used to the prince's absence, so she did not feel as hurt as Lero felt. Instead, Oma was happy that Lero had to experience how painful it was to be ignored by the prince. One night, in frustration, Lero took off the clothes she wore. She searched for her old clothes and put them on, crying and murmuring to herself. Her insanity began crawling back to her. She hated that the prince did not seem to care for her anymore. She walked around the palace at night, talking to no one in particular. The new guards placed outside the palace had no idea it was Lero. They chased her out of the palace, wondering how the mad woman got in. Lero left the palace. Days later, the prince had returned to the palace and it was time for him to become the king of Aku, but he felt restless. He felt incomplete. He did his usual duties of ensuring the smooth run of the palace and settling disputes, but he had not held a ceremony for his succession. When the chief spoke to him about the ceremonial ascending of the throne and proper taking up of duties, he had agreed, but deep down, he wasn't ready for it. One day, as Prince Odi laid on his bed, his mind wandered to Lero, the woman who saved his life, the woman he had come to love. That was when he realized his need to see her. He searched for her in the palace and she was nowhere to be found. Oma saw him moving around the palace and Lero's quarters and she asked, "It seems you lost something. What could it be?" "Well, Lero doesn't seem to be in this palace," he said, still searching. Oma chuckled. "You had no time for her, so she has probably gone for good. Forget about her." The prince paused and said, "I know I have been busy, but I cannot forget about her." He asked the guards for her whereabouts, but nobody seemed to know where and when she had left. He took a bag of gift which contained edible foods and fruits, a few dresses and combs. He set out to look for her. He went to her hut but could not find her. He decided to go to the market in search of her. After searching the whole market and no sign of Lero, Prince Odi journeyed back to the outskirts of Aku in search of her. She should probably be at her hut by now. He got to the hut and again, she was not there. He sat on the mat and waited for her, but hours passed and she was nowhere to be found. He was tired of waiting and was about to leave when she came in. She was surprised to see him. "What are you doing here?" she asked, going all defensive. "Lero, I have been waiting for you. I've searched everywhere for you," the prince replied calmly. She began throwing tantrums, telling him to leave. "Go out. Get out of my house." The prince did not want to leave. "Wait, please," he said. "Go away." She shook her head violently. "I cannot go. I am sorry that I abandoned you. I had to do something of importance. I should have told you that," he said. "But you did not. Your guards sent me away also," she retorted. "I'm sorry that the guards sent you out of the palace. I had no idea they would do that. Maybe it was the new guards I employed. I am truly sorry, Lero." He apologized. She must have felt terribly hurt, he thought to himself. "I will call my guards to send you out too." She had a mix of laughter and anger in her voice. She paced up and down, murmuring words to herself. When Prince Odi tried to hold her, she pushed him away. He paused and said, "Thank you for saving my life, Lero. I miss you at the palace. Please." She looked at him with tears in her eyes. Prince Odi embraced her and she quieted down. It felt like there was peace in the air as they held on tightly to each other. "I brought some little things for you. Hope you don't mind," he said, pointing to the bag beside the mat. She smiled. "Let me see." They went to the mat, and she gasped when she opened the bag. "My prince, you shouldn't have bothered about me at all." "Why?" he chuckled. You did this for me. You have done so much for me. No one has ever. I find it hard to accept." The prince patted her back. She fell into his embrace once again. Thank you so much. You are welcome. I'll always be here for you. But I must take my leave now. Come with me, please. Prince Odie smiled and stood up. Okay. I will only see you off, my prince. Thank you for the gifts. I will be at the palace soon, she said. They walked to the path leading to the market and they bid goodbyes. Laro returned to the palace a few days later. She was attended to by the servants assigned to her. Oma was angry to see her return to the palace once more. She has come to fill this place with her insanity. Oma scoffed as she saw Laro. Almost every day, the prince spent time with Laro. They visited the streams, walked through lonely paths, checked through farms together. They openly show affection in the palace, and this angered Oma. What made Oma ashamed was the petty gossips from the servants. Everyone knew she was betrothed to the prince, but, clearly, he was not going to get married to her. The chiefs and other people wondered where he always went with Laro. They also wondered why his betrothed, Oma, was not concerned about it. Everyone expected a fight for the prince, but there was none. Preparations for the prince's coronation had begun. He made sure to bring in Laro. "Can I trust you?" he called one of the serving girls. "Yes, my prince." She bowed. "Take this bag and go to Laro's room and give it to her. Tell her it is from the prince," he ordered. "Who is Laro?" The serving girl was confused. The woman who is mentally ill. She is in the other quarters." He stuttered. He finds it hard to believe she is mad because she isn't to him. "Oh, the mad woman," she blurted out. "Shoo! Don't speak of her in that tone," he warned. "Forgive me, my prince," she said. "The servants are all occupied, so dress her up and bring her to the palace. On my order, take some money for the help." He gave her some coins. "Yes, my prince." She bowed. The serving girl left immediately. Oma approached the serving girl and demanded for the clothes. "I believe those are meant for me," Oma said. "Not at all. It is meant for Laro." The servant responded. "Well, give it to me," she ordered. Those were not the prince's orders. The servant would not let her take it. "I am the prince's wife-to-be, and you will obey me too." Oma folded her arms. "I am sorry, but the prince won't allow this." The servant left for Laro's quarters. As the celebrations began, Prince Odie wasn't at rest. His eyes skimmed through the crowd in search for Laro. When he was crowned king and made to sit on the throne, he saw Laro in a beautiful dress. Her hair was well-packed and she looked so different and extremely beautiful. He was impressed. And when he looked to the other side, he saw Oma. She was beautifully dressed and adorned with finely made beads, but he had eyes for only Laro. It was a tough decision to make, but he knew he found true comfort with Laro. He called the attention of everyone. "My chiefs, and my people of Aku, I am honored today not just to be the king but to lead this great people. Despite the calamity that befell us, you still put your trust in the crown. I am indeed honored." The people clapped and cheered. The new king looked towards Laro, who was absent-minded and focused on picking on her nails. He smiled and said, "I also want to give a good news, a marriage. I will be married to Laro in a few days." He beckoned on the servant to usher her to his presence. The people cheered until Laro got to the front for everyone to see. They discovered she was the popular madwoman, but she did not look so much like her. She was different, neat and beautiful. The people had mixed emotions as they murmured while some clapped. Half the crowd stared at Oma to see her reaction, but her face was plain. No one could read what emotion she had. She joined the people to clap, and this made others clap louder. Oma knew what was in her heart to do. She had her plan, and she was going to let everyone believe she had no grievance against the prince or Laro. Laro stared at the king and smiled. She hugged him, laughing out loud. The people were thrown aback. He cleared his throat and addressed the crowd. "A surprise it must be for you to know I'll be getting married to the woman everyone seems to know. But no one knows her like I do." The crowd murmured as one of the chiefs walked to him and whispered in his ear, "You should consider this properly, my king. You are betrothed to Oma. And Laro is mad. She is of no royal blood." The king said aloud, "There is nothing to consider. Laro here is of royal blood." And one day I will tell the story of how she saved my life. And for the betrothal, I was only a child and Oma was just a child. We had not grown to know what our hearts truly desire, and now I do. So, let the drummers drum. Let the instruments be played. Let us drink and be merry. The drummers began and the dancers began their performance. Oma watched as Lero sat beside the new king. That was supposed to be her seat. All her life she was brought up to sit beside the king and play wifely duties and monarchical duties, but some mad woman along the market trash had taken her spot. How humiliating! She screamed inside of her. Her heart churned from the thought of it, but she kept a very calm face. The atmosphere had heated up as the king led shy Lero to the open space. They danced and laughed together while some people watched and others joined in the dancing. Oma stared at them, smiling wickedly. She had her plans, and just like the prince is about to ruin her life, she will make his life miserable as well. She gulped a cup of palm wine and murmured to herself, "If I will not have my rightful place, he would not as well."